What if a real, living angel crashed into your backyard, and instead of worshiping him, you locked him in a chicken coop?
Welcome to Ani's Bookverse. Read, think, discover.
Today we're unpacking one of the absolute most bizarre, gritty, and thought-provoking stories in all of magical realism.
It's a pretty jarring thought, right? But that is exactly the premise of A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings. It's a story that totally flips the script on everything we think we know about miracles, human nature, and, well, how we treat the unknown. Let's dive right in.
Part 1. The Angel in the Mud. The Descent.
So, picture this. You're in the courtyard of this desperately poor couple, Pelayo and Elisenda. It's a really grim scene. The coastal village is just choked by this relentless 3-day rainstorm, and everything smells like rotten crabs. In the middle of all this mess, Pelayo stumbles onto something inexplicable. But, true to Gabriel García Márquez's style, it is not at all what you'd expect. Instead of blinding divine light and majestic, pristine wings, he finds a decrepit old man face down in the mud. He's dressed like a rag picker, bald, toothless, and his massive buzzard wings are literally infested with parasites. He is completely stripped of any divine grandeur. It's just this grotesque, muddy reality.
Part 2. Captivity and Cruel Exploitation. A Grotesque Carnival.
You know, you'd think finding a living miracle would inspire a little bit of awe, right? But human nature in this village goes somewhere much darker. On day 1, he's found in the muck, and a neighbor instantly diagnoses him as a fallen angel. Then, on day 2, the local priest, Father Gonzaga, steps in, and he actually deems the angel a total fraud. Why? Simply because the creature doesn't understand Latin, which Gonzaga considers the language of God. So by day 3, instead of reverence, this frail entity is dragged through the mud and locked straight into a wire chicken coop as a public spectacle.
What happens next is basically a backyard freak show, and it really highlights just how cruel the townspeople can be. They line up to see him, but they show zero reverence. We're talking about people tossing food at him, like he's an animal in a zoo, pelting him with mothballs, and literally plucking his feathers hoping to cure their own ailments. The absolute worst part? At one point, just to see if he's actually alive, they prod his side with a hot branding iron. The poor creature wakes up with tears in his eyes, panicked, flapping his wings. It is a horrific way to treat a silent, suffering being.
And this is exactly where humanity monetizes the miracle. Elisenda gets tired of sweeping up the trash left by the mob, so she gets this brilliant, albeit ruthless idea. She fences in the yard and starts charging admission, just 5 cents to see an angel. That 5 cents completely changes their lives. They exploit this captive entity to climb out of poverty, eventually building themselves a massive 2-story mansion with balconies and fine netting, all while the angel just rots in their yard.
Which brings us to part 3. The Spider-Woman arrives. The abandonment.
The thing about public obsession is that it's incredibly fickle. Just as the angel starts becoming old news, a new traveling freak show rolls into the village. And this one is way easier for the masses to digest. It's a woman who is transformed into a giant tarantula for sneaking out to a dance and disobeying her parents. Think about the stark contrast here. The angel is silent, confusing, and his miracles don't really make sense, like a blind man growing 3 new teeth instead of getting his sight back. But the Spider-Woman? She talks to the crowd, she eats meatballs they toss her, and she comes with a super simple, easy-to-understand moral lesson.
Naturally, the crowd completely abandons the angel for the cheap thrill of the Spider-Woman. He's just totally neglected. Over the years, his chicken coop actually collapses, and he's left to wander the yard, suffering from terminal neglect. He drags himself around like a dying man, becoming nothing more than a nuisance to the family. In fact, Elisenda even complains that it's awful living in a quote-unquote hell full of angels, completely ignoring the fact that she and Pelayo are comfortably enjoying the immense wealth he brought them.
Part 4. The Angel Takes Flight. The Escape.
Against all odds, he actually survives the harsh winter elements. A doctor who checks on him is absolutely stunned he's even alive, noticing all this whistling in his heart and lungs. But slowly, as the weather warms up, he starts regrowing these large, stiff feathers. They look a lot more like a scarecrow's feathers than a majestic angel's. Then, one morning, he makes a desperate, incredibly clumsy flap of his wings. He manages to catch the wind, gain some altitude over the houses, and simply vanishes over the sea horizon. And his captors, they're just relieved to finally be rid of the annoyance.
Part 5. The Hidden Meaning. Unpacking the Absurdity. Now that we've gone through the cinematic summary, let's pull back the curtain and really analyze what Márquez is actually saying here.
The first major theme is the spectacular failure of human faith. Marquez is showing us that humanity is practically incapable of recognizing true grace or the divine unless it perfectly conforms to our grand idealized expectations. Father Gonzaga and the townspeople completely rejected the divine just because it was muddy, it smelled bad, and it didn't fit into their neat little theological boxes. They wanted a glowing, majestic savior, not a frail outcast covered in parasites.
Which leads us directly into the second big takeaway: the commodification of miracles. Society in this story operates on this ruthless, almost instinctual capitalism. The second something miraculous and out of this world appears, the first instinct isn't worship or curiosity, it's to put a price tag on it. Pelayo and Elisenda turned a living miracle into a highly profitable business without a second thought. It really highlights a dark, exploitative streak in human nature.
And finally, we have to talk about the absolute fragility of society's attention. The way the town completely drops the angel the second the Spider-Woman arrives proves that human interest is fickle, it's shallow. We see this today all the time, don't we? People are driven by cheap, sensational, moralistic entertainment rather than any real desire for deeper truth. The angel was complex and confusing, so they just tossed him aside for something flashier and easier to consume.
So, what's the real takeaway from all this absurdity? I think it boils down to this. Gabriel García Márquez didn't write a story about a captive angel. He wrote a mirror reflecting humanity's darkest truth, that we are blind to the divine unless it serves our breed.